The diplomatic effort to ease the tensions in Ukraine is continuing at the highest levels, but both Russia, NATO and Ukraine seem to remain fixed in their positions. So the latest leaders to discuss the situation, they were the presidents of France and of Russia, Emmanuel Macron and Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin says Mr. Putin once again put forward these requests for NATO to halt any expansion and move strike weapons back from Russia's borders, and once again they were ignored. Meanwhile, Russian forces continue with military exercises close to Ukraine's borders. But Mr. Putin's chief diplomat, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, insists that it is not a sign of aggression.
If it
depends on Russia, there will be no war. But we will not let them undermine and ignore Russian interests. I cannot say for sure if negotiations are over now. As you know, the US and NATO have been studying our simple proposals for more than a month. And only the day before yesterday, we received answers in Western style that are a bit confusing but rational in minor issues. This is better than nothing, but the main thing for us is to deal with the basic concepts of European security.
Now, meanwhile, the NATO's Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, he said the alliance was watching very closely as Russia moved soldiers and weapons to Belarus and was prepared to increase its troop presence in Eastern Europe.
We are also ready to step up, as we actually now do, our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance to prevent any misunderstanding or room for miscalculation about NATO's ability and readiness to protect and defend all allies.
So, both sides sticking to their positions. Let's get more on that phone call that was between President Macron and President Putin. The Élysée Palace in Paris has not yet put out its take on the conversation. The Kremlin has. Here's our correspondent in Moscow, Caroline Davies.
Well, we know it was lengthy to start with, which I suppose is a relatively good sign. But we also know some of the elements that were talked about according to a readout from that call from Moscow. So some of the points that were made, the Russian side have said that they would carefully study the written responses. We know that already. We know that President Putin has got those written responses from America and is saying that they are looking at them. But there's a few other points that I think it's worth pulling out as well. They talked about the fact that the fundamental concerns of Russia preventing NATO expansion, that was not directly addressed, that was not taken into account. We know that that was something that Russia has demanded back in December when they presented these draft treaties to NATO and to America. One of the key demands was that NATO would not expand further eastwards, that in particular Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO, and that they are, and President Putin has highlighted again, that wasn't addressed by the Americans in their response. And then there's this other paragraph as well saying this key question was ignored, which in summary, the key question is that for Russia, they say this is about the security situation for Russia. They view NATO as being an aggressive force, and therefore any form of its expansion, they are arguing, is an issue for their own security.
Thanks very much to Caroline. Well, now let's hear from Sweden. So, a country which, while allied closely to NATO, is not a member of the organisation. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, has been speaking to the Swedish Defence Minister. Let's watch.
President Biden has said there is a distinct possibility that Russia will invade Ukraine next month. Do you share that assessment?
It's difficult to say what will happen, but there is a direct threat to Ukraine, and it's also a direct threat to the European security order. And I think it's very important to be very clear to the Russians that they are responsible for the crisis. They are the reasons why we have this situation. They are the ones who are ready to break international law and have done it before. So the responsibility for this situation is on the Russian side totally.
But of course, President Putin blames NATO for its eastward expansion, for threatening Russia's interests. He also has criticized, indeed even Ukraine has expressed concern about removing non-essential staff from embassies, moving military hardware to this area, sending military forces to Ukraine, that it is contributing to an escalation of the crisis.
There is no threat from NATO and any of the democratic European countries against Russia. They have never been any threat. This is some sort of Russian narrative that are a fake news and a false falsification to make some sort of tension here. So there is no threat from NATO, no threat from Europe.
What is your assessment about what Sergei Lavrov had today? He's talking about, in his words, grains of rationality in America's response to President Putin's demands. You yourself recently said, don't be naive about Russia. What do you make of it then?
Yeah, we should not be naive about Russia. They want to stepping forward here with their unrealistic list of different sort of demands on Europe and the neighborhood. And all of these demands are unacceptable. And I'm positive that there are some sort of discussions between NATO, United States and Russia, but we cannot compromise around the questions that are fundamental for each nation's sovereignty and integrity.